All right, we move now to that first panel discussion, the first of three, a chance to dig a little deeper into some of the issues facing most, if not all, of the leaders joining us today. President Michel has joined the others on the stage. I would also like to welcome three new guests joining us virtually, two from the other side of the world. We have Prime Minister Ardern of New Zealand. A warm welcome to you, Prime Minister. President Duque from Colombia, and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. We know it's been an extremely busy time for you, Madam President. Certainly no shortage of issues to talk about. In fact, my difficulty has been trying to keep up with so many fast-moving stories. But we start our discussions on the theme of recovery. What should guide it, what it should look like, how to frame it to electorates deeply worried about their health, their livelihoods, and about just how much longer the planet we live on can hold out. President Macron, I am aware that you have to leave us in about 10 minutes or so I am going to kick off, if I may, with you and pick up on a couple of points that you made. On the multilateralism, first up, I would like to ask you, Mr. President, just how optimistic you feel now that we can get things back on track, given we have someone new in the White House from January 20th.
Thank you very much. Look, I think a lot of things depend on us. And for me, the main test on multilateralism will be about management of this COVID crisis. Whoever's in charge, if we manage to cooperate on vaccines, solidarity vis-à-vis emerging countries and especially Africa, we will put ourselves in a situation to resume de facto multilateralism. So for me, I would say the first test would be the answer to COVID-19 crisis around this, I would say, ACTA initiative. The second point is obviously about climate change. Yeah. And this is the second test, how to do vis-à-vis vulnerable countries. Jacinda is perfectly aware of that and so committed with us, and I see her. And de facto, we managed to do our job at the European level. US and China should move in the coming months. If we deliver on this way, I think we can have concrete results. So for me, I'm reasonably optimistic if we manage on these two short-term issues with very long-term impact to work closely together.
I want to pick up on climate, and I promise you I will come to the others shortly. I want to pick up on climate. You spoke about this in your address, Mr. President. Can you honestly say that you have fully leveled with your populations, any of you, about what's at stake in the climate crisis and the scale of change really needed to address this? We see government leaders standing together with scientific medical officers talking about the pandemic. When will we see government leaders standing next to climate scientists looking at charts on climate?
I think we started with the GIEC and a lot of this type of experts and bodies, and de facto, we built our European Green Deal on the basis of scientists' approach on these charts. The communication was different because it was not seen as a short-term crisis. And probably collectively, this is a mistake. And you're right, we can probably try to embody differently such a crisis and have a different management. But our strategy, our regional and national level, is definitely based on scientific facts, is worked and built on with academics and so on. So you're right, this is de facto how we work. The question is perhaps how to make it more perceivable by our people.
Indeed. And finally, I wonder, a general question, are you more heartened, Mr. President, or horrified by the way the world has reacted this year? On the downside, national rivalries on vaccines, an upsurge in conspiracy theories, fake news, fresh fuel for the populists. On the upside, of course, we've seen companies pull together on vaccines, governments putting people before fiscal rules, the recovery fund. Final thought from you, does the global balance come out net positive or negative at the end of all of this, do you think?
I mean, we will see that in 10 years' time. I would say this kind of crisis is a super accelerator of the best and the worst, for sure. And you mentioned that. I think it accelerated a lot of things. Science. I mean, nobody did imagine that in less than 1 year time we could invent a vaccine against such a virus totally unknown a few months ago. Indeed, inventive cooperation, and especially when I look at the European level and what we delivered collectively with Charles, Ursula, Pedro, and all the other leaders, I mean, nobody expected that. With ACTA, what we launched, now we have to deliver. It's not yet done. And on the other side of the picture, you're right. We saw a lot of selfishness, a lot of unproductive, I would say, competition, and this neo-obscurantism with fake news and all the guys obsessed by possible plots and so on. But this is where we have to work harder and harder. How to make our social networks more positive and based on facts, how to fight all together in a cooperative approach against these hatred speeches. And this is what we launched with Christchurch calls, by the way, and it is very important in such a context. How to work collectively to have more science and common knowledge in order to base our decisions. I mean, all in all, I'm a strong believer that this crisis will accelerate the best. If we work very closely together and if we just try to address the bad and build collective positive answers.
Okay. President Macron, many thanks for talking with us. Apologies to the others, by the way, I haven't brought you in. The protocol people will be having words with me, no doubt, afterwards. Prime Minister Ardern, let me kick it off with you. Thanks for joining us. You made a successful sales pitch, for want of a better phrase, to your electorate recently. How hard is it, Prime Minister, to keep such an increasingly bewildered public, racked by so much uncertainty, on side? What resonates most loudly with them?
Well, I think, first of all, just ensuring that there isn't bewilderment. Look, there's no question that for everyone, there has been no particular rule book for a pandemic of this nature. But I think our populations have appreciated knowing that leaders have shared information as they've seen it. They've openly communicated the questions that we've had to grapple with and chosen a path that resonated with the population. So from New Zealand's perspective, our approach to COVID was a wellbeing approach. Our view was that there was no economy without our people. And when we analysed the impact of COVID on our population base, it was very clear that elimination strategy was the right approach for us. Now, I acknowledge that it's not necessarily possible for everyone. We have a rather large moat around New Zealand, so that's enabled us to put in place controls that aren't possible everywhere. But it ultimately was a wellbeing approach, and it's one that I think we have lived to feel very pleased about having brought in place.
All right. Look, I'll come back to that, Prime Minister. Thank you. President Michel, let me ask you, on the back of what we've just heard from Prime Minister Ardern, is it an approach, the well-being approach, the happiness index, is that something that can work in Europe?
Yes, I'm convinced that it's really key to think what are the possible criteria that we can use at the democratic level in order to demonstrate that we are improving the well-being of the people. And this is the fundamental goal of this European project. Article 3 of the treaty mentioned this goal, the well-being of the people, the dignity of the people. And I think we should think politically, what are the criteria that we can consider in order to assess year after year, are we making more progress? And this crisis is a unique opportunity. It's a big challenge, but it's a unique opportunity in order to rethink the way we are working, the way we are taking decisions together at the collective level. And I hope in Europe, and maybe also with the support with organizations such as the OECD, we can try to make some progress. Next year, in Portugal, we will have an important summit, a social summit. And the question is how to take into consideration those big, difficult transitions, the digital one, the climate change, in order to make more progress and to take into consideration for our people those important goals.
So just to very quickly follow up on that, you are saying to us that this sort of progressive policy making can work in Europe, can become defining parts of European nations' budgets.
Yeah, but look, the recent months, something really interesting happened in many different countries in Europe, but not only in Europe. When we took the very difficult decisions with regard with the lockdown, it was a clear choice. It was a choice for health, for the well-being of the people. It was more important than the economic development. It was a very strong and clear choice politically that we made. And this is an interesting signal, and that's why we think, for example, that this question of resilience is so important. How is it possible to be better prepared at the European level, but more generally at the global level, against the different crises, against the different shocks? And this is also the translation of our priorities. The question of the fight against inequalities, for example, the sustainability, it's another very concrete example. And that's why I hope that we can make more progress on all those issues in the next months.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, President Michel. President Duque, if I could bring you in. Colombia, of course, joined the OECD in April of this year. How has accession helped inform the way that you're pitching recovery, President Duque, and your country, and boosted the momentum for reform?
Well, I first of all think that for us to be the 27th member of the OECD represents a big change and a very important instrument for us to accelerate reforms. As you well know, we have already launched a plan, which is the recovery plan for Colombia. And there are three elements that we have been working closely with the OECD. The first is we want to bring back better, greener. And we have made a clear commitment that we want to reduce our CO2 emissions by 51% for 2030. We have also said that we want to become a carbon neutral country by 2050. And we are now leading the energy transition in Latin America, especially focusing on non-conventional renewables. The second thing is inclusive recovery. And that means that we're going to expand, like no other time before, the access to free public education. We are now getting to 30% of all the students in public education being paid by the government, and we'll get to 50% by the end of our term. But at the same time, we're making the largest expansion on water and storage, and we're also reducing social gaps in the rural areas. And the other element that is very important is how do we bring this as a gender revolution? And that's how we close the gaps between salary differences between men and women. So we want to make this inclusive. And last but not least is how do we accelerate technology? And that's why in the latest index that was published by the OECD, Colombia became the third country in the world accelerating the digital reform in government and other services. So we see this as an opportunity. And as the OECD well says, better policies for better lives. We want to work with the OECD so that all these policies will be accelerated and will be producing a big impact on the Colombian population.
Very quickly, President Duque, to follow up on that, we heard Prime Minister Ardern talk about what resonates in her country. What resonates in Colombia, given the way you need to bring in the informal workforce? Given you mentioned the rural areas and the importance of providing for the rural areas, what do these people need from you?
Well, I think there are three basic challenges that we have to face. The first one is informality. Informality in Latin America has been very high. How do we tackle informality? We need to have more SMEs. So that's why with this reform program that we have launched and also with the recovery plan, what we want to do is bring more resources and let the SMEs become the drivers of the generating of new employments. The second thing is that in the rural areas, we want to build what we have called the contractual agriculture. And that means that the buyers will connect to the small peasants and they will have a fair contract long-term with the lowest interest rates that we have ever had in the rural areas. But at the same time, we need to provide them credit and training so that they keep on expanding the agricultural border. With that, we're going to make a big reform in the rural areas. And last but not least is how can we make a big transformation in productivity? And that only comes through education and technology. That's why we have made a big bet on double titling, so that when every student graduates from high school, it has in one hand the high school diploma, and in the other hand the technician diploma. So with an additional year of virtual training, he can become a professional. But he's gonna be trained with the right elements to be participant in the fourth industrial revolution. That's why we're working on AI, IoT, cloud computing, so that we give the pertinent training to the students and they can become actors at a starting role in this fourth industrial revolution.
All right, President, thank you very much indeed. President von der Leyen, I know you're deep in Brexit negotiations, and I will come back to that, I'm afraid, at some point. But this crisis has clearly been a catalyst for consensus. We saw recently on the budget, on climate, to the surprise, I think, of many skeptics. Is this, Madam President, indicative of the sort of progress and consensus to come? Or is that wishful thinking, given the deep underlying rifts that clearly exist among member states?
Well, we have seen that the old saying, never waste a crisis, is correct, because at the very beginning of the COVID crisis, there was an instinctive trend towards inward looking and reacting on the member state level. But we saw very fast that this crisis is too big for any member state or any country at all to overcome it by itself. And then the turnaround was interesting. There was a lot of trust then into the European institutions, with the task of, we proposed to build up Next Generation EU with the new budget, which is now 1.8 trillion that will be invested in recovering, but also preparing for the future. And it's fascinating to listen here to the panel. It is these big trends that are now emerging. It is, thanks God, by now, the big trend in getting greener and more sustainable, and having the European Green Deal, for example, as our new growth strategy.
Yep.
It's a huge trend of digitalization. And the topic of resilience is the new one, mainly looking at the health topic. So, and these are all topics, no member state is able to manage them on its own, but together as 27,
Yep.
as one united Europe, we have an enormous strength to move forward.
And I will come on to the Green New Deal in just a second, but let me get this right, though. You are telling us on budget, on climate, the EU 27 are now properly united behind you.
They are. This was one of the results of the Council, European Council, but you also see that we are deeply convinced that in, for example, standing up, fighting the climate change, we have a responsibility to show leadership, to move forward, and to show that growth is possible, but a growth that is sustainable and that is clean and that is healthy, and that it's worth to invest in the new technologies, because this is not only good for the planet, it's not only good for people, but it will also be, there will also be a strong demand over time worldwide to have these new technologies. And if we are able to prove that you can have growth that is sustainable, that is clean, then we're moving a big step forward.
All right, thank you very much indeed. President Sanchez, we heard this morning that the post-war period gave birth to the Marshall Plan, the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, ultimately the European Union, public medicine systems in many places. Do we need to be thinking now, do you think, on that scale again? Do we need a new global settlement, a new grand institutional architecture to move us through this?
Well, I think so. I think that, as Ursula and Charles said, at the European level, we understood in the beginning of the crisis the need to share not only knowledge, but also to be united against this pandemic that doesn't understand borders or ideologies or gender issues. So I think that we have to move forward. I think that the World Health Organization is an institution that we need to strengthen. Also, the OECD it has been very useful and helpful for all of us because we found a place where we can get information, share knowledge, see good best practices in order to face different perspective of this pandemic. So I'm a firm believer of multilateralism, and I think that it is crucial for all of us to strengthen multilateralism in the years to come.
Is President Sanchez, is the US firmly back at the table in your mind? and would this year have been easier had Joe Biden been president of the United States?
Well, I mean, I didn't understand, and I said this publicly many times. I didn't understand this vision of the Trump administration blaming the European Union and let's say saying that the European Union is an enemy of the United States. It's the contrary. I'm firmly believe on the transatlantic relation. We were speaking about it in the last council, but let me tell you, since Duque is here and the Secretary General comes from Mexico, I think that the European Union is also very, very linked to Latin America, and this is a continent, a part of the continent that we need to, let's say, to approach, especially after this pandemic and the social consequences.
I will pick up on that in just a moment. President von der Leyen, very quickly, and Prime Minister Arden, I will come back to you. And by the way, feel free to jump in. I want to keep this interactive. President von der Leyen, you talked about renewing and reinvigorating the US relationship. What does that mean? What does that look like over the next 6 months?
Well, briefly, what we know for sure, we're not going to pick up where we left 4 years ago, because the world has changed, the United States have changed, and we have changed. But what I see is that we can start a new transatlantic agenda that is indeed focused on developing together a sustainable vision, a fight against climate change, a green vision. To set the standards, how we're dealing with technology and mainly digitalization, so that we have a human-centered approach to digitalization and mainly AI. So it's not the market who's going to regulate it, it's not the government, but it's a human-centric approach to deal with data. And of course, then have a look at the resilience of this world and the new topic, of course, what are the lessons learned from the COVID crisis will shape this common transatlantic agenda.
President Michel, having the US on side, as an ally on climate, how much easier will that make things?
In the European perspective, it's very important to be totally committed at the diplomatic level in order to support this green agenda. And indeed, we hope with the new American administration that it will be again possible to work together in order to be ambitious. This is the same when we have a summit a few weeks ago, for example, with the Chinese authorities. We are totally committed with the 27 member states in order to encourage a country like China to make more progress on this topic. It's also a question of fairness, and that's why at the trade level, we think it's very important also to work with a country with, like America, like the United States, the same with Japan, for example, in order to try to develop the same common agenda and to consider climate change as an important leverage in order to improve our economic relationships.
I'm going to continue with climate in just a sec, but you mentioned China. So Prime Minister Arden, I can't really help asking you this. Are you less skittish about the US-China relationship going forward from your perspective?
We are not naive. We don't think we don't think with this new administration in the United States that tomorrow everything will be easy between Europe and the United States. But at the same time, we think that we will have a more positive channel of communication, a more positive channel of dialogue, that it will be possible to have a better mutual understanding. And about China, we have in Europe a clear vision. We discussed a lot the recent months at the level of the leaders, the 27 leaders, and we have a united approach. What are our priorities? First, we want to engage with China, especially at the multilateral level. A topic like climate change, health, COVID-19, we think we need to work together. We need to cooperate, point one. Point two, we need to rebalance our relationship with China. We need more reciprocity, we need more clarity, the state aid regime, for example, And point three, important in Europe, we don't paper over our values, our democratic values, and we don't hesitate to promote our strong democratic values, the human rights, etc.
Okay, President Michel, thank you. Prime Minister Ardern, same question to you. I mean, from where this is a critical relationship for you. Are you less skittish about the US-China relationship going forward? Is there reason to be optimistic here?
I don't think skittish is necessarily, Alex, the word that I would use. You know, we're pragmatic. Yes, we've had a change of leadership in the United States, and that fundamentally, lends itself to potentially a different approach. I think we may see a slightly less combative approach. However, I don't think we should be so naive to assume that suddenly the foundation of some of the contested space has fundamentally shifted. I think that there are still some domestic realities for the United States in the trade area that they may indeed conduct their diplomatic relations in a more predictable way, but some of those underlying issues and tensions, I expect, may still remain.
Yeah,